Good morning, everyone, or good evening, wherever you're located. Welcome to the Duke Alumni Professional Development Webinar, Secrets or Habits of Extraordinary Mentors. My name is Susan Gordon. I am the Senior Director for Career and Professional Development at Duke Alumni. And in a minute, I will put my email in the chat. I would love to hear from you about what you are looking for in terms of your professional development and what Duke can do to support you. So enter my email, and I just love to hear from you. Just reach out to me directly. Always looking to understand people's needs. So we have a great panel for you here today, and these are people who have spent decades mentoring and have thought deeply about it and have been recognized also as extremely successful mentors. So our agenda for today will begin with a panel discussion. We'll go for about 40 minutes. After the panel, we'll leave some time for Q&A. If you have questions as you're listening to the panel or at the end, just use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. We'll be collecting them. Make sure you send your question to all, not to one of the particular panelists, so that we can see them and collect them for you. Finally, at the end, we're going to share with you some exclusive Duke resources that you can use to find mentors or to make yourself available to mentor other Dukies and to develop those relationships. You saw a couple of them highlighted on the intro slide, the Duke Alumni Network and Ask a Blue Devil. And we also have a Duke Guide for Mentors that we'll be sending to you in the chat if you stick around with us till the end. This panel will be moderated by Robert Lefkowitz, the James B. Duke Professor of Medicine and 2012 winner of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. We're extremely excited to have Dr. Lefkowitz with us here today to moderate this panel. And he's also the author of a new book, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm, which is a really fun and fascinating memoir of his life as a scientist. And it also includes an entire chapter on mentoring. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lefkowitz, and we'll begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to discuss this subject of mentoring, one that is near and dear to my heart, to say the least, with my distinguished colleagues who are also on the panel. And so without further ado, I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves and maybe make an initial statement of any sort that they might wish to share about mentoring, whatever comes to mind, and then we'll begin a discussion. So maybe first I'll recognize Sanyin Siang.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. Go Duke. And I'm here where I am in life as the series of, I'm the result of a series of lifelong glorious failures and brilliant mistakes. And I hope to be able to share some of those lessons with you today. A little bit about me. My personal mission in life is to enable greatness in others. I've tried chasing greatness before, but you can always control the outcome, and it's not as much fun chasing greatness. But enabling greatness in others, that is a whole lot more fun and more meaningful. And that shows up for me as a mom. I'm a mom to three kids, ages 11, 9, and 7. They change ages on you, so I have to remember that. As an educator, I love working with MBAs and undergrads. And I'm also a CEO, leadership coach, and author. And if you cut me open, I bleed Duke blue. I met the love of my life at Duke. He's a Dukey. I live a block away from Duke. I went to Duke undergrad in engineering, and I also graduated there with my MBA. And now I work there, and I run the Coach K Leadership and Ethics Center at the Fuqua School of Business. And where mentorship shows up there is that we have a group of second-year MBA students called the Cole Leadership Fellows, whom we train up to serve as mentors and coaches for every single daytime MBA student. And that's how powerfully we believe in the necessity of mentorship. and how we have to build that into a core part of our leadership responsibilities. And for today, something I would love to touch on later on in this panel is the following. I know traditionally we tend to think about mentoring as only helping the other person. But I think if we look at it from that perspective only, we're going to miss out on one of the greatest growth opportunities in our lives. I have learned just as much from those who I've mentored as well as from my mentors. Mentoring others is a personal, lifelong learning opportunity. And what I found in my experiences is that if we're intentional about it, mentoring others can be a huge personal leader development growth opportunity for each of us. And that's something I hope to touch on today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sanyin. Next, let me recognize Alan Kendrick. Alan?
Thank you, Bob. Let me just take a point of privilege to say to my colleague and Nobel laureate, Dr. Bob Lefkowitz, I thank you and Duke Alumni Affairs for organizing this panel discussion. To my fellow panelists and to you, our Duke alumni, friends, and family, I'm delighted to bring greetings to you today on behalf of Dr. Paula D. McLean, Dean of the Graduate School and Vice Provost for Graduate Education, and all of my colleagues in the Duke Graduate School. I am Alan Kendrick. I serve as Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Development. What does that mean? Essentially that I am the Chief Recruiter for the Graduate School. And as I go around the country, well, not so much now. Now it's all on Zoom as I travel the country on Zoom. And we look for the next class or talent for the research masters and PhD programs. I am exposed to mentoring each and every day. I will recant, in a previous Zoom conversation in preparation for today's event, Dr. Lefkowitz recounted that in his career, which spans more than 50 years at Duke, that mentoring was not a subject that was at the forefront of discussion, if you will. So it is with intention that I enter today's discussion to highlight our Cultivating a Culture of Mentoring toolkit and workshop from the Graduate School. It is with purpose and intention that the Graduate School, with its mission to train the next generation of scholars, introduces students to the subject of mentoring. Let me also acknowledge that my colleague, Dr. Jacqueline Looney, Senior Associate Dean and Associate Vice Provost, is kind of the expert in this area. And some of you may know Dean Looney. I am here certainly to share my perspectives on behalf of the Graduate School, to talk about our workshops, and as we do these workshops for campus, students, faculty, and staff. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you very much. And the next member of our panel is Dr. Sanka Johnson. Sanka?
Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thanks, Bob, for having me on this panel, and Susan for organizing this. I suppose Bob and I talked about this like last week when we were preparing for this panel, that when we started this, mentoring not only wasn't really described as an intentional thing, it wasn't even really given that word. And so I suppose, my first mentoring experience was actually in meeting my best friend in college freshman year. He needed to learn physics. And I would sit down with him and not only teach him the physics, but teach him that he could do physics, which was sort of like the core aspect of the mentoring. It wasn't just providing the information, but providing that spirit, that sense of internal feeling that, something could be done. And then I went on to teach dance to 3-year-olds, to teach kindergarten, to teach first grade. I actually mentored tiny little kids in a daycare center for a while, and a number of other tasks before I entered graduate school. And it was there that I sort of really understood what mentoring was, because I was blessed to have an extraordinarily good and kind man for a mentor. He was unusually patient. I had no biology when I entered graduate school. I had actually very little science. and spent most of my time drawing bugs on the lawn because what I had learned was art. And all the other advisors would make fun of my advisor for having even taken me. But he saw something in me. He saw something that he wanted to care for and to foster. And he fought for me during my exams. He fought for me during my oral exam, which otherwise I would have flunked. He got me through to the end, and he lives just 2 miles down the street from where I now live outside of town. And it was from that I sort of modeled my own sort of mentoring spirit, I guess is the way to say it. I'm not sure if I have a mentoring style or even any mentoring tips. It's more of a spirit, a sense of outwardness, a sense of caring, a sense of what Bob mentioned last week as interest, an interest in the other person, an interest in where they're going and in getting them there and not knowing where they're going and not trying to push them there, but rooting for them. It's a funny generalizable sort of thing that I cannot put my head around. I've sat here actually for the last few hours before this trying to put my head on what's actually going on. But I've mentored students at Duke for the last 20 years. I continue to tutor middle school children and high school children in math and physics. And most importantly, to teach them that they can do it. I've created math teams in my lab. We have a math team known as the Nasty Women, an all-woman math team to get around math phobia. So just all of it is to create this sense of anything is possible, anything can be done, which I suppose I first learned from my parents who came to America as immigrants, very poor, and made everything work by figuring it out for themselves. If we needed a telephone, my dad would wander the streets until he found one in the trash, take it home and fix it. And so that's the spirit I try to convey. And thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for these wonderful comments. There are tremendous wisdom in what we've all just heard. In terms of my own comments, the first thing I want to do is reduce expectations on the part of our audience that they're going to walk away from this workshop knowing how to mentor. Because I think if there's one thing I would say, one truism about mentoring is there's no one size fits all. And mentoring has to be individualized, and it has to be individualized in both directions. That is to say, each mentee is unique. And so whatever your mentoring style is, it's going to have to immediately adapt itself to whatever individual you happen to be working with. Okay, and that'll be very different. What motivates one person, totally different, will turn off another person. And so you've got to be a good psychologist and learn and care, as Sanka said, about whoever you're mentoring. But the other aspect of individualization is your mentoring style is of necessity going to be different than mine because we're different people. And your mentoring style must be a reflection of your authentic personality. I tend to use a lot of humor in my mentoring. And anybody who knows me well knows that I use a lot of humor. But that's just me. Some people are not funny. And if you're not funny, you shouldn't try to be funny. I mean, there's nothing more grotesque and awkward to observe than somebody who's not funny trying to be funny. So again, you've got to completely individualize. The other thing that several of our participants mentioned was the idea of a culture of mentoring. And I think, as Sanka was sort of getting at, I think that the most important thing about mentoring is it's just an aspect of who you are. In other words, most of the day when I'm with people in my group, I am mentoring. But am I saying to myself, I'm mentoring now? No. It's just an intrinsic part of what I'm doing. I'm caring about them, encouraging them, trying to guide them. And more important, I think, than anything that you ever say is to simply model the behaviors and the aspects of whatever your craft is that you model those things in a transparent way. For example, Sanka's father didn't tell him anything about what was important to do. He just went out and got the phone and found it. Well, okay, Sanka drew lessons from that, not because his father said, here's a mentoring lesson for you. It's just because his behavior. So I think one of the most crucial parts of mentoring is transparency. People can't use you as a role model if you're sequestered behind a closed door or in an administrative office. You need to be out there and sharing what you do with them. Everything is a teachable moment. And so in my own work, whether it's writing papers or talking to people about ideas or working with a journal editor who I'm trying to convince about the worthiness of one of our papers, yeah, I want the students with me, not so that I can tell them how to do this, but so that I can show them how to do this. So those are a few thoughts that are on my mind. Now, to pick up with some of the comments that panelists made, Sanyin mentioned the idea that crucial to her is the idea of bringing out the greatness in others. And I think that one of the most crucial aspects of mentoring is to empower other people, okay? So the question I have for the panelists, and maybe we'll start with Sanyin and then go around, is what tips or thoughts do you have on how we can empower other people as their mentors?
So I think one of the mistakes I've made in the past is trying to come in with expectations of who they can be, rather than, and that sometimes when we come in with those expectations of what great looks like, we automatically have blinders on, and that can keep us from recognizing what gifts they have. And so one tip is to come in and just learn about them. You know, it's that adage of they won't care what you know till they know that you care. And when you care and believe in them, that's how you can empower them. And so it's not about making them into something that you want them to be, but it's chipping away at everything that they are not, so that their brightest, best selves can shine through, whether that's a gift for just connecting people, whether that's a gift for, they might have these intellectual gifts that we can easily recognize, or they might have emotional gifts, or they might even have great physical gifts, but just be open to really understanding them for who they are and what their hopes and dreams and fears are, and starting from there.
Great, thank you. Alan, any thoughts on empowering trainees?
Sure. So one of the things I'd like to go back to, Bob, is that all the panelists have mentioned, as you say, today's workshop is not a how to do it. It's not here's the template and the format, now go to it. No. So I think the first thing that we do is provide, like we are today, resources, information and resources for in my case, graduate students to begin to think about mentoring. What do we know essentially about mentoring? This is not something that we guessed about. This is not something that we think happens, but what we do know is that graduate students who do receive mentoring get jobs. They also are successful in their programs. They're also more active in their programs when they feel that when they come to the end of their graduate school career, you know, the surveys that they fill out tend to be more positive. They also complete their degrees. So essentially, what we are doing, I think some tips, is just to kind of get your feet wet from day one, to use resources in terms of mentoring to find out what this is about. And again, to know that it's not cookie cutter, but very individualized.
Great, thank you. Sanka, any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sanyin that such a big part of this is believing in the mentee. I one comes to mind for me is, I mean, I had about a 12-year-old boy in our neighborhood. He was the daughter of a friend of ours, and he was getting creamed in math. And he was going to flunk out because of his math ability. And I just from the beginning started out with the belief that he could be really good at math, and just continually portrayed that to him and said, you know, you can do this, you can figure it out, we're going to get through it. And amazingly, he became to love math, and he's now moving on to become a meteorologist, which of course is nothing but math. And it just sort of came out of nowhere. It's like the belief almost made it happen, which I loved. But I think Sanyin's right and Bob's right. It's very different depending on the person. So for some of my graduate students, believing in them means being very hard on them. Means that, you know, you're slacking off, you're going out and getting drunk, and I'm just going to like lean on you to get there and get it done because I believe you can do better. For some, the belief is telling them already, you're doing wonderfully, you're going to be a nervous wreck if you push yourself this hard. Here is a beautiful vacation spot out in the mountains. Go spend 3 days with your partner, come back, and we will start again. So the central thing is the belief that, you know, they can be empowered to be what they want to be. But the actual method is entirely dependent on the student. They all need something different, and the real goal is to figure out how to get there.
Thank you. I certainly endorse all the comments that have been made. I think I once told Sanyin the story. This is on the subject of sort of belief. But a number of years ago, I guess it was my 60th birthday, they had a sort of a feshrift for me here at Duke, and I have something like 250 trainees in my lab, and a good number of those came back, and they had various things. And so they had a session where they were telling stories about me. And many of them, of course, related to my mentoring style. But one guy who's a distinguished professor at Cornell today told the story that when he was a postdoc in my laboratory, this would have been in the 80s, one of the things that kept him fired up is that I had given him the impression, and probably even told him, that his project was the most important and exciting one in my laboratory. And he always clung on to that, and it gave him tremendous confidence and drive and energy, knowing that, you know, his project was really the favorite of the boss. But then one day he was talking with one of his colleagues in the lab, and he learned that this postdoc pretty much thought the same thing about what I thought of his project. And then he called a couple of other guys over, and it turned out everybody in the lab was convinced, even though they were all working on different things, interrelated, they were all convinced that they were working on the most important thing in the laboratory. And they were so convinced because I had given them that impression that I really believed what they were doing was the most important thing. And of course, there was no subterfuge here. I really believed it in the moment that I was talking with them. So again, I think it comes back to this theme of believing in people. Now, I think another part of empowerment that I'm very conscious of, and it's a fine balance that one has to walk. And I don't know the extent to which this generalizes to many fields, but certainly in scientific fields, such as I work in, you have to, and I guess this is probably true more generally, there's a very fine line that you need to walk, and it's different with every trainee, between micromanaging what they do at one level, or making the opposite mistake, being so aloof from what they're doing that they flounder. I find, and as I say, this is very individual, that I have to give enough guidance so that they're not floundering and they stay on a course, focused on a certain goal. but not micromanage. Now, what's the problem with micromanaging? I mean, since I know a lot more about the subject than they do, maybe that would get us to the goal more quickly if I was telling them exactly what to do. But the problem is to empower somebody. When you work on a project together, when it is successful, they know how much was you and how much was them. And if not enough was them, if they haven't played the significant role in moving that forward and getting it done, they will come out of the experience lacking the confidence of knowing, hey, I can really do this. And so to gain that confidence, which is of course what empowerment is, they have to be given enough space so that at the end, they have intellectual ownership of what has been achieved. And without that, they'll go forward thinking, well, it was all down to the boss, even if they get the credit for it. So I think for me, threading that narrow needle between micromanaging on the one hand and being too aloof on the other is a real key for empowerment. So, okay, another thing I would love to hear what our panelists think about is that, you know, in almost every field that we work in, creativity plays an important role. I don't know that anybody even knows what creativity is. I won't ask anybody to try to define it. I guess it's you know, a lot like that famous Supreme Court jurist said about pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it, right? Same for creativity. So I would like to ask our panelists for any thoughts they might have about how we can encourage creativity in our mentees. Sanyin?
So I wanted to connect this question with what was just said, which is so much of mentoring is actually an act of leadership, because it's when you talk about shared sense of ownership, one of the most powerful questions we can ask someone is, what do you think? What do you think? And that's an invitation for them to share their thoughts and ideas. And so I think so often we think about having things fixed to us, when really it's just like the motion offense, which is actually very creative in basketball. It's actually having things fixed to them, and we're adapting to them and understanding what are the range of, what are their strengths, what are their areas for improvements, what are the guardrails. And when I think about creativity, true creativity actually comes with constraints. That's when we're most creative. We're most creative when we know what the box is. I mean, all of us have felt the tyranny of the blank page, right? If you say to someone, go write something, oh, but if you say, hey, go write about X, Y, or Z, and you put constraints around it, then that's when they can exercise their creativity. And so have one of those constraints in any project, any initiative, be meaningful and purpose. Start with, what is the why of this? Why are we doing this? And that's the constraint. Now let's look at what are your strengths, that your contributions that we can really help you flourish and thrive in adding to that, so that you have a shared sense of ownership. And when people start down that path, they're now more willing to take risks. And we're more willing to take risks because you're giving them the floor. You just show them, here's what the ceiling is. It's that purpose. We're gonna cure cancer. We're gonna, change people's lives. And then you're giving them the floor to, like, I'm here to catch you because I know what your weaknesses are, but I also know what your strengths are. And that's when they are willing to take those risks and fly and innovate and be creative.
Great, thank you. Alan?
I'll start this part by interjecting here with a quote from one of our colleagues, Carrie Haney, Professor Haney. Haney is an associate professor of political science here at Duke. And he says, in terms of mentoring, it is us, the mentor and the mentee, in combination, figuring out what the goals are, what the objectives are, and what they, meaning the mentee, want to accomplish. So now kind of looking to this notion of creativity, we always begin with questions with our students. So one of them is, what does the mentee gain from the mentor? And I think all of us have come to that today. I think we've asked that question. What does the mentor, as Sanyin said, what does the mentor gain from the mentee? And so through a series of vignettes that we created, we challenge students to think about what are the resources that you can seek to be creative, to develop into scholars. One of my favorite is the Imposter Syndrome. I still have it. And let me just share with you just an example. Well into your first semester of graduate school, you started to feel anxious and doubtful of your ability to fit in intellectually. Everyone else in your program just seems to be so much smarter and talented. You've been haunted by thoughts that faculty admissions committees made a mistake and that you will be found out and asked to leave the program. And again, what we see here, Bob, I'm still waiting for them to tap me on the shoulder sitting at my desk. But what we do is say, here is the scenario, and I think all of us in our career and still might face this, but what do you do to overcome this? And what are some creative ways? What are some resources that are available to move, to help you successfully move through that fear?
Great, thank you. Sanka, any thoughts about encouraging creativity in our mentees?
Oh yeah, God, this is always the killer, because I mean, so my research, we're not doing anything with great practical value. So we live and die on creativity. You know, it's gotta tell a story in a way where, you know, we're story writers, except the story we write is nonfiction. And what I tell my students very often is that creativity, it's kind of like love in that it's the most delicate of mental states. Nothing can get in the way of it. Like Alan said, you know, if you feel like you're an imposter, if you're stressed, if you're unhappy, if things are difficult, you won't be able to get creativity kind of crawls out of the cracks. It crawls out of the cracks when everything else is doing well. It can be difficult to get otherwise. And so part of it is me trying to create an environment where they feel comfortable to be creative, where they feel valued, where they feel they're part of the group, where their personal life is going well, where their physical life is going well, where they feel welcomed. That's a big part of it, because in that situation, creativity is kind of like, you know, that tiny little like Charlie Brown Christmas tree that can actually like grow, right? And I completely agree with Sanyin that creativity lives in a box. It's the other thing I always tell my student, you know, freedom lives in a box. You know, if you want to do something really weird and crazy, you first have to put some kind of constraint around it. It's like if you're a sculptor, you still first have to work with the limits of the clay. And when you have those limits, all of a sudden you can do it. But if you tell a sculptor, you know, anything, you know, then all of a sudden they're trapped. So I very much agree with the constraint. And then for me, yeah, a big part of it's just trying to get them into that right space to where the ideas start to flow, because otherwise I have no idea where that stuff comes from. It's just one morning they come in with a beautiful idea. I was like, wow. And the final thing I always tell them is the best scientists or the best thinkers of any kind, the best artists, they have 9 terrible ideas and 1 great one. And then it starts over again. It's like, to have good ideas, you have to be willing to have a lot of bad ideas and just throw them out. Just be free to have bad idea after bad idea. And then every now and then one of them is like, wow, that is so cool, because you've got to push. And, you know, you're pushing in funny directions, and a lot of those will never work. But every now and then they do, and it's beautiful.
There's a lot of great wisdom in what we've just been hearing. You know, Alan, you were mentioning a quote from one of your colleagues, and it got me to thinking about, there are a lot of wonderful quotes Some of them I have hanging over my desk for inspiration. But when it comes to creativity, a couple of my favorite quotes are from Albert Einstein. Now, whether or not he gets credit, it's sort of like Yogi Berra. There are a lot of quotes attributed to Albert Einstein and Yogi Berra as well, rather different individuals. And how many of them they really said, I don't know. But one of the ones from Einstein that I like is, he said that imagination is more important than knowledge. That's certainly been true in my own case. I often tell my students with no irony that one of the keys to my own success academically is how little I know. Another one from Einstein that I like vis-a-vis creativity is he's alleged to have said creativity is intelligence having fun. And I really ascribe to that. And then there's another quote, I'm trying to remember it. I think it was attributed to Salvador Dali, famous painter. He said, every child is an artist. The difficult thing is remaining an artist when you're grown up. And I think that's speaking to the creativity inherent in youngsters, which gets somehow beaten out of a lot of people along the path to growing up. My own approach to encouraging creativity, and I think this mirrors a lot of what Sanka had to say, is I have lab meetings every week or two, which go 3 and 4 hours long. And if you were a fly on the wall, I mean, you wouldn't understand a lot of the, scientific discussion because it's highly specialized. But what you would understand is there's a lot of laughing, a lot of humor. And for me, I use humor to get, as Sonke was going to, that's how I get the creative juices flowing. When people are relaxed. And also, for me, humor is inherently a very creative enterprise. I mean, it's a matter of seeing things in a way that maybe other people don't. It's not about telling a joke. It's juxtaposing two things that are perhaps seemingly very disparate and seeing a relationship. I mean, and in the moment that people see the joke, that is to say, see the humor in something silly, that seemingly silly that you're saying, they're making a little discovery. When they see the joke, they're making a little discovery. And that, to me, again, also gets the creative juices flowing. People do their best and are at their most creative when they're having fun, okay? To take the opposite view of it, if, and I was talking to Sanyin about this just the other day, let's take sports. Let's say you have a terrific top 10 team like Duke, and they're out there and they lose to a much lower ranked team. And now they're interviewing the players after the game. And they say, what was wrong with you guys tonight? Well, they usually say one of two things. But one of the things that they often say is, we're just not having fun. That's right. If you're not having fun, the shots aren't going to go down. But if you're having fun, not only the shots going down, but the team chemistry is red hot. So I think having fun is an attitudinal thing. And, let's face it, some people just have a very dour personality. It means they won't be successful. It doesn't necessarily mean they won't be successful, but they'll sure have a lot less fun doing it. One of the things that I've always taken great pride in, I was just talking to an early alum from my lab last week, who went on to a very distinguished career, was provost at Vanderbilt, etc. A woman named Lee Limbert. She called me for some advice on something, which is another aside there. She was a trainee in my lab between 1973 and 1977, and she was calling me last week for some mentoring. So, I mean, it is, as with your children, a lifelong relationship. So they continue to sort of come back to you time after time. But one of the things she said to me, just in reminiscing, we hadn't talked for a while. She says, one of the things I always remember, Bob, is the time I spent in your lab was one of the most fun times that I ever had in my life. And I take a lot of pride in that because I think, as I say, when people are having fun, when they're enjoying themselves, their creativity will be at a peak. Now, one other thing, go ahead, Sanyin.
So there was so much in what you said there that I wanted to just sort of unpack a little bit. So the first part with imagination is more important than knowledge. And something that tickles all of our imagination and is that humor. But I also want to connect back to what Alan Kendrick had, the question he posed, what are mentors also getting from mentees? And we did talk about, we learn so much from our mentees as we do from our mentors. And I think it's this, connecting the dots between imagination, creativity, and the learning from mentees. If we're leaning in on questions, so much of, like when we're at our stage, a lot of times we have what's called liability of expertise. So we have certain assumptions that are running around in our heads all the time. And those assumptions may no longer hold true. And so one of the great benefits with engaging with mentees is asking questions, and they may share back things that you're like, hey, this is different from the assumption I have. Tell me more. Tell me what you mean by that. And then you discover, wow, I was wrong, and my mind can be, and that's how we stay imaginative, and that's how we can have our creativity be unleashed. And so many of my students, like just one the other day said, you know what, 500 words may be too long to read. I thought, oh, okay, so what other mediums can we use in order to communicate and convey ideas? And I'm learning. We're all of us here, we're learning from those whom we're engaging with all the time. And that's one of the funnest things to do.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. In fact, in this recent book that I wrote, which you were kind enough to mention, I dedicate the book to my children and my students, who I say have taught me a lot more than I have taught them. So I'm certainly on board with that. Another interesting aspect of mentoring, at least for me, is encouraging intellectual risk-taking in my mentees, because there's no doubt that, again, I speak from the vantage point of a scientist, the most exciting things generally come from ideas or projects which are inherently risky. Safe things may lead to, new, secure knowledge, but less likely to lead to really important things. But taking risks is risky. And so the question is, how can we encourage our trainees to take risks without frightening them off, but to try to really get them to extend themselves and not just always take the safe way? Alan, any thoughts on that?
Thanks. Just listening to you all talk, something that came to mind in this, Bob, when you talked about mentoring being lifelong, and I couldn't agree more. Well, one of the things I see, and even in my personal life, is that the mentor and mentee relationship over that span of time can kind of change. It can morph. With my own advisor, I said to her as she became a dean, I said, well, I'm an assistant dean, but here are some things that you're going to want to know from the faculty side going into this, and let's talk. Let's have coffee. Let me kind of give you my wisdom in terms of some things that you might want to know going into graduate education. The relationship with my mentor in terms of, I'm a political scientist by training, and esoterically I study Black electoral behavior within the African diaspora. in comparative perspective. And my advisor is an Americanist. And so I said, yeah, you don't do this British politics stuff, but let me bring you up to speed. And if you are thinking about teaching a course, for example, in comparative race politics, here are some things that I suggest. Just kind of giving an example of how I've seen that mentoring relationship where this individual was responsible for me receiving my degree, but then I was able to then lead the conversation and give advice. So there is a back and forth now between us, so it's kind of, when you say, gosh, here, who's the mentee here and who's the mentor? And over time, I think that both of us have shared in the mentee mentor balance going back and forth. So I just wanted to add that because, I also tell people to seek multiple mentors. Bob, when you talk about the notion of humor, getting to know you, you're a great storyteller. And I've gotten to learn that. Now, so for me, in terms of mentoring, I say, Bob probably has, some wisdom about this that I need to ask him, and I can present that in a way that I know that would work for you in our relationship. There are some colleagues that we have, Bob, that I wouldn't joke at all, that I know when I walk into the office, it's 5 minutes, it's about business, and seeking multiple mentors, in essence, knowing who you work well with, but also having those mentors that give you the resources that you need. For example, when I started graduate school, I had an advisor who was a mentor who was an advisor who said, look, if you're going to be a political scientist, you're going to have to do X, Y, Z. I want to see this on a transcript. That was not the mentor that I sought when I began to have conference papers to say, oh my goodness, what do you wear to these things? How long do you present? And how do I whittle this 35 pages down to they only want me to talk for 7 to 10 minutes? How do you do that? And that was a different person in my life, a different mentor that I had for that. So the advice that I also hear is that the mentor-mentee relationship does change or can change. And I encourage people to seek multiple mentors.
Wonderful. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left before we're going to move to questions and answers. Sanka, anything you want to add on the issue of risk-taking?
Yeah, pretty simply. I mean, it's like you said in the beginning, I just model it. I make it clear to my students that I have taken every stupid risk and paid for it. I have fallen off cliffs. I've nearly drowned. I've almost been eaten by sharks. I've taken scientific risks. My life has been chaos and I'm still here. Right. My current seminar talk is my failures, where I present 3 major failures, things I was sure were true, got grants for, did the work, and boy, I was wrong. So I figure, in my position right now, advertising risk and failure is one of actually the good things I can do.
Good, and I'm so glad you brought up a word which in some circles is a dirty little word, but for anybody who's been successful, they know it's the key to their success, namely failure. It's another whole subject. It's interesting to hear you talk about that, Sanka, because I actually I have a 1-hour seminar that I run every couple of years over in the medical center for research fellows around the campus called How to Deal with Failure and Rejection in Science. There's a lot there in terms of failure. And failure and risk-taking go hand in hand, but so does success. Susan, we don't have that much time left, but do you want to help us out with some questions that may have come in?
Yeah, sure. There are a lot of really great ones. I'm going to sneak one in since we've been talking a lot about the experience of mentoring in the lab and graduate students, and I know a lot of alumni are hoping to also mentor undergraduate Duke students. So maybe Sanka or others who've had experience what kinds of guidance do you find that Duke undergraduates in particular are looking for?
Sanka, do you want to take a shot at that? What kind of,
Can you quickly repeat it, Susan? The audio blacked out for about 10 seconds.
No, I'm sorry. The question was what kind of guidance Duke undergraduates do you think that they're looking for?
Right now, I think they're looking for a modeling that life is going to be okay. I think Duke undergrads, you know, they're remarkably smart, but they're also they're planners, and the seniors and juniors are watching their entire life like sort of look like it's coming undone, and having, you know, older alumni say that life does take its weird twists and turns. The pandemic is a big one, I got to admit, but life takes its weird twists and turns, and we come out on top in the end. And I think that's a big thing right now that undergraduates need to hear. I meet with my students individually in classes very often right now, like for an hour at a time, mostly just to tell them that life will work out. So if I were going to pick one thing, it would be that.
I think that's very astute. Any other thoughts, Alan or Sanyin, on the issue of what undergrads are particularly looking for?
I think Sanka did hit it on the head that they're looking for modeling. My dealing with undergraduate students is I'm a pre-major advisor and advise freshmen and sophomore students. And one of the things that I make sure that I'm very conscious of is that even in terms of course selection and talking about the pandemic, that my fears don't become their fears. So it's a two-way conversation to say, you know, what are your struggles? What are you going through? And then talking about resources that are available to them to move past that.
Great. Sanyin, any thoughts?
I think beyond the emotional security and confidence and perspective that all of you have shared, that is the number one thing. On top of that, I've heard two other things. One is just trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of their careers, right? And for there, I think that's where it's so context dependent. That's where our perspectives can really help. Not our answers, but our perspectives, because they're in a different context now. So one thing I shared with them is the job that you will be in 5 years from now doesn't even exist yet. And so how then can we talk about how you can maximize the learning and the growth right now? And then the other thing is, this is a generation that has grown up being told, you can go change the world, you can go save the world. And then this pandemic hit, and they're feeling very insignificant. And there, it's like, you can still change the world. Just start with a smaller world. You know, help that neighbor, help each other, be there for your friends, be there for your classmates. And because they want to be big. They think world, literally. And start from, you know, it's do the things that you can do, and don't worry about the things that you can't do. That's a John Wooden quote.
Great, great. Susan, why don't you give us another one?
Sure. You know, people, I think a lot of times, especially during these times, are thinking about how they can give back more. And a couple of questions that relate to that. One is, if you're interested in being a mentor, do you seek out mentees? How do you make yourself open? And specifically, how do you make yourself open to mentees who may not share the same background with you? So maybe younger professionals who have a different gender or ethnicity or family background. How do you make yourself available?
It's a very good question. You know, one of the problems, not really quite the right word, that I've had, especially in the latter phases of my career, is that people are so intimidated by the reputation that they're afraid to reach out to me. And of course, you know, getting back to the imposter syndrome that Alan was speaking about before, I guess I've always pictured myself as the Wizard of Oz. In fact, sometimes my wife calls me the Wizard of Bob. But you know, you all remember the story. When they finally got behind the green curtain, there was this little wizened old geezer turning the cranks. rather than the Superman that everybody imagines. So sometimes, you know, again, this is just a very personal perspective. Sometimes people are so put off by a reputation that they kind of get the wrong idea. I remember not that long ago, one of my students was telling me that they were talking to a student, and they were saying, the friend was saying to my student, well, I guess you don't get to talk to Dr. Lefkowitz. This was pre-pandemic. I guess you don't get to talk to Dr. Lefkowitz very often. She says, what are you talking about? I'm in his office every day. The door is open. She says, no, you got to be kidding. Says, no, I mean, he's just like anybody else. He's there. He loves to talk. As you've all learned, I'm a schmoozer. Yeah, but that's a very personal thing. But what about some of the others on the panel? Sanyin, do you have any thoughts about that?
So just as Alan mentioned, having a diversity of mentors, I think it's so important to also have a diversity of mentees, right? And what your chemistry, that chemistry, because this is so much human dynamics, that chemistry is so important. And you may not hit it off with every single person you reach out to, or every single person who reaches out to you via the Duke network, and that's okay. That's okay. But looking for, Duke already has a lot of diversity of backgrounds, diversity of like race, gender, international, those are religious backgrounds. Those are all so important. And when you have that diversity of mentees, you can make your world bigger. And making our world bigger, that's meaningful in this life. And one other thing I want to add is, so, you know, Susan's going to share resources with you about how you can connect and be part of the Duke Mentoring Network. And a student or a recent alum reaches out to you. And that first meeting, it may be great, but it may also be not so great. And don't let that first meeting being not so great keep you from, keep you sidelined from mentoring. It can be not so great for many reasons. One is that potential mentee, they may be just talking a lot about themselves. And the reason they might do that is because they want to impress you. And so, you know, because they can be intimidated, you know, in reaching out to you. And so they're trying to impress you. And what you say there is, look, I know you're smart because we're Dukies and you're not here. This isn't a job interview. So let's just have a conversation and learn about each other and tell me how I can best support you, you know, and sort of neutralize. And don't try to impress them. They're already impressed. And just, you know, give it they may not follow up in terms of the etiquettes of networking, but that may be because they were never taught. They might be a first-gen immigrant, you know, who don't know that you're supposed to follow up and say thank you and all those things. But it doesn't mean that you haven't made a difference. So that's it.
Thank you. Susan, are we out of time or?
I think we are. I mean, I'm going to wrap up so people can sign off. If you want to stay and chat more, we can also do that. Just thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Bob and Sanyin, Alan, and Sonke for joining us and for sharing your thoughts and for this conversation. I put in the chat, I'll put it again. We have a guide to mentoring from Duke, and then we have a couple of resources, the Alumni Network, where you can connect, update your information, share your background so other alumni can find you and students can find you. If you've updated your profile there, especially your LinkedIn, people will find you. And then the same things, we have Ask a Blue Devil, which is more of a kind of a direct, people reach out and ask questions and look for advice. And if you're updated in the Alumni Network, you're also updated in Ask a Blue Devil. We also have a slide that we can show that has a link where you can sign up to, there you go, in the yellow, that link, you can make sure that you're signed up, that you're really interested in becoming a mentor and connecting with other Blue Devils. So it's bit.ly/AABD sign up. So those are the resources. And then again, reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat if you just need anything professional development support from Duke that you're interested in learn different types of programs that we're not offering yet. I personally would love to hear from you. And that's kind of it. We'll wrap it up, but do you have any final words of wisdom for us, Bob?
Well, no, just try to make the most of your mentoring opportunities. And I think more than anything else, I think as we all stress, realize that mentoring is really a part of almost everything that you do. And much more important than what you say is the behaviors that you model. And be transparent. Let your students and fellows and mentees observe you in as many professional settings as possible and learn by your role modeling even more than what you actually have to say. I want to add one more thing. See the humor in your everyday situations. It'll certainly spark your creativity.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for spending this hour with us.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.